Alrighty, folks, we're on Roots week number 13 now, day number 1. The passage for today is Numbers chapters 13 and 14. So it's a little bit longer today, but it's just a story, and so you kind of need to get the whole story or else it won't make a whole lot of sense. So we've been focused on lately the law. We spent a lot of times talking about the 10 Commandments, but there's a lot more to the law that Israel was given that sort of told them how to be the people of God, but we summarized it sort of with the 10 Commandments. The problem is that Israel never manages to keep this law, and so that's kind of what we're getting into today. And so this passage is really all about one of the first great failures of the nation. Not the first, but one of the first for sure, and a major one. It's kind of a depressing read. So they've been wandering in the wilderness, like they met God at Mount Sinai. They just gotten out of slavery in Egypt. They get to the edge of the land that God had promised, and they're getting ready to go in. And I should say Moses sends 12 spies in the land. Go check out the land, see if there's people there, see what it's like. They come back and they say it's a really good land. It's awesome. There's all this stuff that God promised us about. But there's people there, and they're really powerful people. In fact, they're giant people there, and they're going to kill us all if we go into them. And so the people say, well, it would have been better for us to have just died in Egypt. We should have just died in the wilderness. Why did God bring us all the way here just to have us killed in this land? And so they complain against God. They complain against Moses. They actually threatened to stone Moses to kill him. And everything just spirals out of control. So just to read sort of a section of this, after all this goes down, in chapter 14, verse 11, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'How long will these people despise me? How long will they not trust in me despite all the signs that I've performed among them? I will strike them with a plague and destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation and mightier than they.' But Moses replied to the Lord, 'The Egyptians will hear about it, for by your strength you brought up this people from them. They will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, the Lord, are among these people, how you, the Lord, are seen face to face, and how your cloud stands over them, and how you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. If you kill these people with a single blow, the nations that have heard of your fame will declare, since the Lord wasn't able to bring this people into the land he swore to give them, he has slaughtered them in the wilderness. So now may my Lord's power be magnified just as you have spoken. The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in faithful love, forgiving iniquity and rebellion, but he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the third and fourth generation. Please pardon the iniquity of this people in keeping with the greatness of your faithful love, just as you have forgiven them from Egypt until now.'" So you see this conversation between God and Moses, where God says, I'm going to wipe them out, and then I'm going to turn Moses into a great nation. But Moses prays and says, don't do that. And you can just see here God's concern, and Moses' concern with the name and reputation of God himself. Moses' concern is that, God, if you wipe these people out, then what will the other nations say? They're going to say, well, God couldn't bring them into the promised land. They're going to say that you're not a great God. They're going to say that you're a weak, you are a weak God. And so Moses prays not necessarily, he prays on behalf of the people, yes, but not necessarily because of them, for their sake, but he prays for the sake of God's name and God's reputation. And he actually quotes scripture, he quotes God's words back to God, says, God, you said that you're slow to anger, abounding in faithful love. And by the way, that's a great practice for you to adopt. Pray the scripture, it's a great thing to do. And that's how Moses prays to God, and Moses' prayer is ultimately answered, as you will read on in the rest of the chapter. But I want to bring us back around this idea of God's name and God's reputation, because we, as the people of God, our destiny does reflect on him. When we disobey God, when we don't honor his word, when we don't do what he says, when we live in sin and we're just content to live there, that reflects on God. The consequences that we suffer as a result of our sin, that reflects on God. Now, for right or wrong, because the truth is that it's really for wrong, because God didn't make us sin, obviously. It's not God's fault necessarily that we're acting that way, but that is how it's perceived. It reflects poorly on who God is. And so, in a way, our lives, our destinies are directly tied to his reputation. And so think about that in the way that you live. Is the way that you live accurately reflecting the nature of God?